Hello, I'm Lester Hudson, and in this session of Gospel Ministry Wisdom series, I will be dealing with pastoral leadership. You should find my download for this session, look something like this, on the website, free download. Hopefully you will print off a copy for yourself and be able to follow as I walk through this material. I'm the architect of one of the most infamous missionary questionnaires anywhere you will ever find. It's designed to help me find out who a man is. I want to know what he believes. I want to know that a man is doctrinally sound. I want to know that a missionary is morally sound, has a good track record. I'd also like to know about his sponsoring church, what authority is sending him to a mission field. I'm very much interested in a missionary spirit. I've known some really doctrinally sound, I felt good men, but who had a spirit that really was bad. Just arrogant, want to force their doctrinal position down everybody's throat, no amount of reasoning, and sit down and let's reason together as reasonable, godly men, but men who were so passionate that they had a ramrod in their hand. Missionaries that I essentially agreed with from a doctrinal standpoint, but I really couldn't support because the spirit was so negative and so pushy and so arrogant. As good as those considerations are, I have a bigger consideration when it comes to evaluating missionaries. I want to know what kind of plan the missionary has. If he's going to some place, a foreign field or maybe someplace within the States, and that missionary is going to start a church or he's going to be used in a good missionary capacity, he needs a plan. He needs to know where he's going. So part of my hope when I ask missionaries questions, either in a written form or in a verbal form when I have the opportunity, I'm searching to find out who the man is and what he plans to do and how he plans to get there. I'm going to talk about that rationale or that mentality in this lesson today. If a man has a plan, the very fact that he has a plan tells me that he's at least thought about it. Has some idea. He's given it some considerations. He wants to go somewhere, and he has a plan or some idea about how to get from point A to point B. I know that leadership is not all wrapped up in a plan, but I think that the absence of a plan strongly suggests that there is no vision and there's no leadership. So in this session about leadership and vision, I'm going to talk about the gospel ministry and the fact that it is a leadership position. Gospel ministry puts you into the public eye. Whether you like it or do not like it, people are watching. Your children, your wife, members in the church, and to some degree the community where the church is. They're watching. Here's the man. Here's the man of God. We want to see how he does. And so they're always watching to see how a man does. Dr. Lee Robertson, who was so greatly used of God at the Temple Baptist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Temple Baptist College, actually it was a Highland Park Baptist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is the author of the famous saying that everything rises or falls on leadership. I am with him. I think he was absolutely dead on. In both directions, I've seen it happen time and again. I've seen some good, viable, prosperous ministries where there was good, strong pastoral leadership. I've seen some fine guys for as personable and guys that I'm never pretty strong doctrinally, very good with the scriptures, fail. The failure was not in what they believed. The failure was in how they behaved. They simply had no leadership skills. They had no ability to be out front and take care of business. If your ministry fails, it will not likely be because you're doctrinally unsound. You can be a student of Scripture and fail in the ministry. It will not likely be because of your location. It will be because you didn't have leadership. Because you were not the guy who knew how to reach out to people in such a way as to cause them to want to follow you. So I want to say this session is not an exhaustive examination and discussion of leadership. In fact, after this session, I want to continue what I'm starting here in another session or two. But what I do want you to understand is that you cannot make it without a certain or good degree of pastoral leadership, if especially you're going to pastor a church. Maybe a little more so as a missionary, but not much, because the same dynamics are needed in both cases. There has to be leadership, and leadership within itself speaks of a plan. They're Siamese twins. They sort of go together. A real leader has vision, and he has a plan. Those are the two areas that we will discuss in this particular session. So in your handout, I would ask you to look at it, and you will notice that I say here that leadership involves vision. Leadership involves vision. And there are two aspects to this point. One, and the first, is that leadership means being out front. A leader is out front. By the very nature of who he is the person who's to be out front. Sometimes, and I will say more often than most preachers realize, a preacher, a pastor especially, should be out front physically. Leadership, to some degree, says that the leader is physically, visibly out front, where people see him, his body, his work going on. They're seeing it being done. This is the exemplary mentality. I'm an example. I want to show you how to do this. I'll do it so you can see how it's done. That is so valuable, especially in the work of the Lord. An out front example sends a message that you're not too good to do it. You're not too high and mighty to get dirty like you expect the people to get dirty. You're a person who's willing to put yourself in the places where you expect others to go. It certainly takes away being out front, doing the hard work, being an example, takes away this high and mighty, I'm better than you, superiority, hierarchy image. And because of some who've professed to be Christians and religious leaders, Christian leaders, church leaders, who practice a hierarchy, that is, the pastor and the deacons and the head people in the church are different than the people in the pew. And we are higher than you, and so hierarchies have developed, as for example, in the Catholic churches, Eastern and the Western Catholic churches. That hierarchy attitude where this guy up here wears a robe and he's too good to get his hands dirty has caused people to sort of expect that in a church and out of a pastor. And I can assure you that most people resent it. They don't think that the pastor in substance and before God is really any better than they are. They understand that he's a man of God and he has a special role and they should respect him, but they do not work very well under a person who thinks he's too good to get his hands dirty. The pastor should be willing to wash a commode if it needs to be washed. He shouldn't think he's too good to cut the grass. Circumstances may not allow that, but sometimes it is necessary for a pastor to be in that kind of role. So it's an out front example. I've had the privilege of visiting Israel a number of times. One of my dear friends over there is named Edo Canaan, and Edo's a guide. He's a language expert, 7 languages, just a prince of a guy. And he has been in some of the wars that happened over there that freed that country and defended that country. And he was talking about the Golani Heights. So we were up there on one occasion and talking about the generals coming up from down there at the Sea of Galilee up those slopes while those Syrian guns were up there just blazing on them, and how that when they charged up the hill, the generals were out front. They weren't back behind telling soldiers, you go get shot. They were leading the charge. That seems foreign to a lot of preachers. Me get dirty? Me get out here on a work day and put on a pair of gloves and grubbies and get out here and do that? No, I need to prepare a sermon. I have to get in my office. I need to make a hospital call. Nobody buys that. There may be times when that is true. But people are wondering, why didn't you get your sermon done before this day like you expect us to get our work done and free up 3 hours or a half a day to do this work down here? I'm talking about leadership, physically being out front, because leadership demands being out front. Ministers, I say, shoot themselves in the foot right here. Somehow, when there's work to do, they always have something else to do. Some place to go, some other crying need out there. People learn best by examples. It's a standard way of good education. You want me to do it and me to learn how to do it? Show me. Give me an example. Let me see you do it, and I'll watch you, and I will hear you, and I can pick up on it. But I don't want you to just tell me to do it, expect me to do it without, if you're my leader, show me how. Show me how to react to a person who offends me. Show me how to react when there is sickness or hurt in a life. Show me that the grace of God is really sufficient. Show me that you really believe in a work ethic by you working hard. I want to see you do it, and that will teach me or help me to learn how to do it. Much learning, I will say, probably most learning is hands-on. Jesus took those apostles. He didn't take them to a classroom and sit them down there and start saying, now lecture number 1, lecture number 2, we meet tomorrow at 12 o'clock, and ta-ta-ta. He took them where he went. They walked by him. They slept in the same kind of conditions he slept in. They ate the same kind of food. They saw him react to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He taught them by example. He became their leader. He was their leader. And he did it largely by example. If not out front physically, surely the leader must be out front mentally. I cannot stress this enough. To be a leader, you have to be out front, and that can mean physical, and often does, but it certainly will always mean mentally. Sometimes I know that age and demands and other factors will make it impossible for a pastor to be out front in a physical way, or a leader, but we're talking especially pastors here, but not mentally. There's a case in the book of Samuel. In fact, if you look in your notes, you will see 2 Samuel chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, and you know that David was the leader, the undisputed leader for a long time in Israel of the people of God. And there were some problems came along. He made some mistakes and got himself in considerable amount of trouble. And he had a rebellion. In fact, his own son rose up against him. And because of some of the sins of David, a lot of the people, most of the people of Israel followed the son, Absalom, and not David. They had a rebellion against him. But after that ended, there came a time when David was getting old, like we all do. I don't know if he had arthritis or just what slowed him down, but he was slowing down. He couldn't keep up. Didn't have the moves he once had, the quickness he once had, perhaps, and all of that. But the Bible records in this 18th chapter of 2 Samuel, David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself. They're about to go out against an enemy. They're going out in battle. Normally, David was the physical guy out there in the front. He was leading the charge. He was ready to do it again. But the people answered, Thou shalt not go forth. For if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. Now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore it is better that thou secure us out of the city. I bring this to your attention because there are times when a man like David, and there are very few like him, but he was a good example and ought to be a good example of preachers, pastors especially. When years take their toll and demands take their toll, and you can't always, and maybe shouldn't always be the guy that is out there mowing the lawn or that's doing a lot of the other work. Good organization and structure says you have other people who are capable, and sometimes you have to let them do it. But you have to still be out front because they need to know that you're the one who thought it through. You're the one who sees how to, you're the one who taught them, you're the one who's overseeing and inspecting what they're doing. You're still out front. They know you're still the man. It's not like you're sitting down doing nothing. You're off goofing around while you're expecting all of them to be doing this work. No, you're leading. You're still out front in your heart. When a leader is not physically out front, he will always somehow have somebody else out front. That's a law of how it works, a vacuum situation where when there's a vacuum for leadership by the leader, somebody else is going to step up and become the leader. So the leader has to stay out front. He has to stay out front in his head, and the people have to see that he's doing the leadership in that way. Now, I also want, if you'll notice in this point number 3 in your notes, in one way or another, leaders are always ahead of the pack. Keep that in mind. That's foreign, I realize, even though most young preachers or old preachers would say, well, I know that's true, but it's not true in practice for a lot of us. Somebody else is out front. So let's talk about it for a moment. Once the leader is no longer able to stay out front, someone else will get out front. Someone else will emerge. Somebody else will step up and take the leadership, either physically or mentally. And the leader loses his leadership role. He may still have the title, but he's not fulfilling the job. And so in the view of the followers and the bystanders, he has the title, but somebody else is the real leader. He loses the leader, he loses his leadership command, even though the title's there, when he is no longer out front. When that happens consistently, followers lose their allegiance to the old leader, and they begin to gravitate toward the new leader. There's a classic case in the book, in the life of David and Samuel, about him when he began to slow down and he got involved with some other things, some things he shouldn't have gotten involved with, like Bathsheba. And you know about the stories of David. He was a mortal. He was very passionate and lots of issues that he dealt with. But he was humble about it and was willing to commit it to God, confess it, and go to God for forgiveness. But in as some of these things began to happen, King David's son began to step in. David got too busy to address many of the needs of the people. They felt like they weren't getting enough attention, enough help when they needed help from the man who was designed to be their leader or supposed to be their leader. So they began to look at somebody else. And here's the boy, Absalom, handsome and got a little gripe in his craw. I didn't get treated right by my dad. He exiled me for a while, and he went on with exploiting negativism to the point that people began to look to him. He said, well, if I were king, I would do this. If I were, and he just kept saying, okay, look what's wrong, look what I would do. And he stole the hearts of the people of Israel, actually turned them against his father, their leader who had proven himself many times over and given himself. This man stole away the hearts. How does it happen? How can a person steal the hearts of a group of people? How can a deacon, how can an older member, a moneyed member, how can a lady with a loud voice steal the hearts of a church? Part of it happens when that person steps up as the leader is not doing his job. That person steps up and does what the leader ought to be doing. That person is out front with ideas. That person is out front with showing example. That person is out front in lots of different ways, and people begin to see it. And what happens? The hearts turn toward the real leader. Oh yes, we have a pastor, but he's basically impotent. He doesn't do his job. Here's who really runs our church. Here's who really offers the ideas. Here's who's really the spark plug around here. It's not our leader. Keep in mind, someone will always be out front. I said that a while ago. I want to repeat it on purpose. Someone in all levels will always be out front. Maybe openly, maybe quietly, or from behind the scenes, but someone is always directing the show. You can mark that in your book. Someone is always directing the show. Someone's always in charge. The person who's directing the show, or it may be a group of persons, like a committee, a deacon's group, or a group of old heads, 3 or 4 old members who pay a lot of the bills, and maybe somebody who has a strong voice and who's willing to get in your face and be overbearing and put people down and do it loud and publicly. Whoever, just keep in mind, whoever it is that is directing the show is the true leader. And often in an organization, especially a church, it's not the person you think. It's not the pastor. It's not always the CEO in a company. It's the person who's in charge, not with authority, but they take the charge and they fill the gaps and they meet the leadership requirements and expectations. This is true in a family. Somebody's in charge. I know several families, preachers' families, where the wife is in charge. She's the one who really directs the show. And the preacher said, well, I just want to get along with my wife, and if God's in it, he'll involve her too. Yeah, he will, but let me tell you, that screws the point up a lot. The reality is the preacher's to be the leader in his home. And his wife's not to be the tail wagging the dog, telling him what to do, and him too weak and spineless to stand up and say, this is where God would have me go, and you need to get online. I'm not talking about being mean and ugly about it. I'm just talking about the reality that in a home, somebody is running the show. And it's not always a husband, and it's not always the wife. Sometimes it's one of the kids that's gotten too big for their britches, and they think they're above reproach and above discipline, and mom and dad are too spineless to stand up and make their own child do what's right before God. The guy kids indirectly running that show. It happens in a nation. You got to know somebody's running a country. Not always the president. Sometimes it's the Senate. Sometimes in America it's the Supreme Court. In fact, many times it's been the Supreme Court. Seems like directing the country here, at least in America where we are. If the pastor does not lead, someone will. This is in your notes, and I'm reading here a little bit from it, but I want this to be so clear. When things do not go well, the pastor will get the blame, often for what someone else engineered. Somebody had an idea in a committee or in some other format, in a Sunday school class or somewhere, and the pastor didn't take the initiative and lead. This person had an idea, and they were strong-willed and strong personality enough to kind of get it to going, and it didn't work. And who do they blame? That person who had the idea and suddenly sold it and tried to get it to work? The pastor gets the idea or the blame. He's the one who should have done something. Things not going well, whose fault? We need another pastor. The pastor can get, and often does get, very angry at the person he knows who negotiated the scenario that brought trouble. Didn't work out. He knew it wasn't going to work. And he's angry at them for messing things up and saying they're trying to take over the church. When the real problem is in the mirror most of the time. The pastor should have been out front. A person like that shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. The pastor should have had enough strength and initiative to offer strength and leadership to have hedged off or prevented or certainly minimized that sort of sideways or sideline interference that ended up being such a big distraction and often a real hurt to a church. This is how it happens. In real churches, I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I've watched how it goes. And when the person who's supposed to lead doesn't, somebody always steps up. And often when somebody steps up, the pastor doesn't like it. He begins to get upset about it. Church has trouble. The pastor gets the blame. It happens again. And before you know it, the pastor's saying, well, I believe God is calling me to another church. Well, I've said before, and I'm going to say again, if you can believe that, you can believe I've got an island and I put money under my pillow for the tooth fairy. We blame our troubles on the God of heaven. We blame our lacks, our failure to lead and do what we ought to do on the God of heaven and run from our problems, and we do it with a holy halo, saying, well, God is causing me to do this. God is leading me. Well, that's, I think, a mockery to blame God for what is our own fault because we defaulted. Somebody else caused grief and sometimes hurts a whole church, even splits a whole church or destroys a whole church, and yet we say it was all of God. I will say again, as I've said in this series, if there's a problem and if there's evil going on, you can bet your bottom dollar that it didn't start in heaven. God is not the author of confusion. He is not the author of trouble. It's somewhere in our gearbox, generally in a failure for leadership. Being out front is inseparably tied to vision. You have to have it to be out front. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm in no way talking about some special divine revelation. I know what the proverb says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I've heard my fair share of good people misuse that passage. In a proper sense, that scripture is talking about, I am confident divine revelation, vision from God, God gave it. And where there's no vision from God, divine revelation, the people perish. I know the Turducken rule, and I know how you have to have, scriptures have one truth, or at least one message, but there are many applications. This scripture is talking about divine revelation. However, it has application. It is true that where there is no vision, not miraculous, supernatural vision, but where there is no vision, where the leader cannot see, doesn't know where he's going, doesn't see the problems, doesn't know how to solve those problems, people languish, people perish, churches perish, people get in civil wars, all kinds of bad things happen. I'm speaking here when I say a vision, saying that being out front is inseparably tied to vision, and that being out front is a part of leadership, either physically or mentally. What I'm saying here by vision is the seeing opportunities, recognizing potential. It's good to see potential in people, little boys and little girls that God could use, and see the potential they have to grow up to be leaders in the Lord's church, to be teachers, to be examples in the use of God in lots of ways. It's good to see potential in what can happen when a church makes a good decision to go in a certain direction. Being able to see that, that's the kind of vision I'm talking about. Recognizing trends. There are lots of churches in this country today. Good Baptist churches, doctrinally sound, on their way to that church graveyard. The median age, 60, 65. It's not hard to tell what's happening unless that church reaches another generation of younger people. 10 or 15, 20 years to max, that church is going to be out of business. They're going to die off of old age. Not because of a split, none of that stuff, just that didn't reach the next generation. People died off, their tithers died off, they didn't have enough money to pay the bills, to get down to 10 or 15 people, and they decide, we need to do something with this property because we can't continue out here. So they sell the property and give it to a bunch of missionaries. Well, I'm glad the property could be sold and given some missionaries, some good thing be done with it, but that begs the question or issue of why didn't we do something about it? Why didn't back here 20 or 30 years ago, our pastor, somebody, it should be the pastor, have seen where we're headed, that he was getting old, and we're all getting old, and that we're going to die off? Why didn't we start taking some moves, measures to reach some other people? Why didn't we go for broke and let things be done here? Why would we want to ease along here and die with $100,000 in the bank? Why didn't we use that money to see the rejuvenation and relife of this church? There are lots of men, preacher men, who cannot see trends. They do not see that the church is dying. They do not see that it's moving toward a charismatic direction. They do not see that it's moving toward a Calvinistic direction. They do not see that it's moving toward lethargy and pacifism and lukewarmness. They do not see that they're becoming like a family instead of a church, where everybody gets together and glad hands and shakes hands and ha-has and talks out loud in the middle of the service, where there's very little, if any, reverence. And visitors come in and they say, I wanted to go to church where I could meet with God. I didn't want to go to a family reunion here. And all I see is here this lackadaisical, seeing a trend. You can ease into that. Churches, and it fixes them in a poor, terrible direction. Vision is being able to see solutions too, not just where we're going and some things that are wrong, but seeing solutions. What's missing? Seeing what other people do not see. Most other people do not see. And it also being generally the first person to see it, because the leader is the person who sees and generally sees it first. Not only sees a problem, but sees what to do about it, has some solution, maybe not a perfect solution. Vision is especially the ability to see the big picture, the overall picture, not just Jane's problem and John's problem and a youth problem and a money problem, but an overview, the whole picture, and the picture of the church in the context of the community and what the church is doing to reach the community and seeing trends like the big picture. That's vision. That's the kind of vision that I'm talking here. And I will say that for a pastor, vision is vital. It is just vital. Let me be specific where vision for a pastor should be. It's seeing where his people are and seeing where they ought to be. Read those letters of Paul. He wrote to churches like Corinth, Ephesus, and he showed them, he talked about where they were. Stuck in Corinth, there's trouble here, you have immorality going on, you have lots of problems and division in this church. This is where you ought to go. Pastors need to see vision of, I'm looking at my church, where do I want it to be 12 months from now? Where should it be in 3 years from now? Where should this church be doctrinally? Where should the church be in its youth ministry? What about our buildings? Seeing where we are, seeing where we ought to go, seeing direction, and where things are needed. This is where we're going, and these are the things that are needed here, physically, perhaps for the plant, but maybe in the church service. We need to improve our music ministry. We need to improve our Sunday school ministry. We need to improve our youth ministry. Just seeing these things, and not just griping about them and moaning, but seeing the real need and then seeing what to do about it. Where the church is, how it should move forward, seeing what needs to be corrected, seeing what needs to be improved, seeing how to solve these church problems. If there's a problem with the deacons, if there's a problem in finance, if there's a problem on the missions, whatever, seeing. It's recognizing threats. Threats that come in, and there are always threats coming in the church. False doctrine is trying to get in the door. The devil's trying to bring in a little leaven into the lump. He can have some nice, happy, glad to have you member come in that's really doctrinal, not with the church, going to come in and try to change it. Yeah, the man of God, the pastor of that church, has to watch for those things and have the ability to see these potential threats and see where the dangers are. It's a wonderful ability, and I will say this is a wonderful ability, to know when to move and when to wait. Sometimes haste makes waste. You know that old saying. But sometimes he who hesitates is lost. I understand there's a dynamic on both ends. That ability to read the time to do and the time to not do. To wait upon the Lord and the time to charge. The pastor, the man of God, has to be that person who should be the leader who sees that and makes that call. For a missionary, vision obviously is going to a new area, a new country, to plant a church and seeing, okay, here's the culture, you read the culture, seeing where there's an opportunity, and knowing how to go about actually planting a church in that community or in that place that can flourish. How to do it. Vision. Someone following is a part of leadership. I've been talking so far about leadership being out front, but it also involves having a following. You're out front, but somebody's willing to follow you. In his famous quote, John Maxwell has said, if you're out front and no one is following, you're just taking a hike. Well, I think that's true. And I've known some pastors, boy, they had lofty ideas that just damn anybody would buy them. Nobody's following along. No one buys your vision, then your vision is eventually whipped. It's useless, really. To be of worth, vision must have implementation. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to make it work. Otherwise, it's just a pipe dream. I'll just say that again. Regardless of how visionary a person is, If no one follows, his vision is just a pipe dream. And there are a bunch of preachers who are pipe dreamers. I want to keep in mind here that there's a great difference between visions of grandeur and visions of opportunity that are of value. One thing for a preacher to want to be great and want people to love him and respect him. It's another thing to want to see the prosperity and the success of the work of God. So I'm not talking about dreaming of self-gratification and grandeur. I'm talking about dreaming about the things of God and having vision about things that are of eternal value. There are several reasons why many visionary pastors never seem to succeed. I bet you know them. People in your life that you respected to some degree, and they had lots of great ideas, but just never seemed to get them off the ground. Just a dreamer. That's all they were. Well, many of their dreams are absurd and unrealistic, out of touch with reality. There are 30 of us here. I think we ought to build a $5 million auditorium out here on the freeway. It costs us $10 million time we get the price. Maybe down the road if growth happens, but just to be able to go get a loan, you can't get a loan for that many people unless they're rich for that amount of money. I mean, it's just sometimes just visions that are unrealistic or, like I said, they're just absurd. I think hypocrisy keeps a good many of God's men from being able to succeed. Got a lot of dreams, but they're just inconsistent and hypocritical. Here's a guy that's way overweight, and he gets in the pulpit and he preaches on liquor and alcohol and the damn devil that is and all that bad stuff, and whew, people are looking up there and saying, hey, if this thing about moderation and temperance is really as true as you say, and we ought to be so careful about that enemy over there, what about gluttony? What about lack of control of your passions? Inconsistency, hypocrisy turns away followers. They don't want that in their lives. Their bad character and morals often turn away men. They've had a moral fall here or there, and it keeps haunting them and hurting them, and it's just the way it is. Many times it's attitudes. It's a thinking that's pure and a spirit that is, I've talked about that already in another session, it asserts itself, and they're so negative, and they're so always picking and condemning and gossiping and doing stuff like that that turns away people who would otherwise follow and will not buy onto their dreams because of that. Also, even in otherwise good preachers, a lack of vision, just a lack of clear ideas about where we're going and how to get there is certainly a distraction. I'll tell you what, it is hard, really hard, for most people to follow someone who doesn't seem to know where he's going. You just feel like you're going aimlessly. And there are churches that have no direction, it seems, very little, if any, and have no idea how they're going to get from point A to point B. And the preacher's talking, and he's condemning, you ought to do this, and always people ought to go to church, blah, blah, blah. Where there's no vision, where the man of God offers no direction in how to get there, again, it's a reason why many times they do not succeed. And another reason why many dreams are not realized is lack of a plan. Lack of a plan. So I'm going to talk to you about the reality that leadership involves a plan. A plan is necessary. It's a necessary part of a vision. You have vision, plan should automatically go with the vision. You have where we're going, we have a plan for getting where we're going. And it's a plan with a vision that often produces followers where there's a clean moral life and those standards are in place. A plan provides a means by which a vision can become realized. Innately, people expect their leaders to have vision, but they innately expect, if there's a vision, how we're going to get there. The plan. They look for that. Realistic ideas about how to get it done. Okay, so preacher, you want us to go here and do this? How do you plan? We ought to bring one soul each into this church each month in 2018 or 2019 or whatever year it might be. That's, you're telling us, this is, we ought to win people to Christ. How are we going to do it? What do I say? What's my approach? How do I get in somebody's life? Once I get in, how are we going to do it? How to? A plan that makes a vision comes true. The pastor is the chief leader. Never forget it. You as a pastor, you are the chief leader. And people are looking to you for the way and the way to get there. And let me also say that a plan is a part of being out front. It's a part of that seeing that I was talking about a while ago. The plan sees and envisions how that the dream can come true. It does not have to be perfect. A plan can be flawed. Most plans initially have lots of need for improvement, amending, and it's good to get the input of the good people around you to how to improve the dream and the plan. But the absence of a plan is almost death in the pot every time. It's just there. Man of God is a true leader who will seek out the counsel of the people in his life around him, but will ultimately come up with a plan. He's the custodian of the plan, and he gets input here and there, but he comes up with the plan. Okay, this is where we're going. This is the way we're going to go. For a church, he has a plan for the growth he envisions, for the improving conditions within the church, to get things in order, to get our worship structured where we're getting people, we quit distracting people by singers not being ready and our program not being ready, our worship not flowing. We got to fix that problem. We're hurting ourselves. We're shooting ourselves in the foot by our awkwardness around here. Let's get everybody ready ahead of time. Let's have a plan by which we can give our best unto the Lord, a plan for building a new building and for paying for it. Well, if you have a vision for a new building, you need to have a plan for it. You need to plan how you're going to pay for it. A plan for dealing with a rogue member. There are rogue members. There are Diotrephes, remember. They stick up in churches. So what do you do about a rogue member? What do you do about a moneyed person that thinks he's going to run the show? Or a loudmouth bully that thinks he's in charge? You need to come up with a plan. It's not always an open fight in the middle of church, a slugfest, or a tongue fest, but a plan that's designed to bring about change for the better of this problem, solving it, or other problems that may come, or about dealing with people who need Christ, reaching new members, reaching new families. How's a church like where I am, in the middle of Houston, Texas, in a changing neighborhood, a church that has languished and was heading, it seemed like, in a direction to perish? How do you turn it around and begin to get people excited and wanting to come? How do you, when you have a church where there are hardly any children, turn it around where there's children? You start reaching parents who come to church and say, I didn't see any kids, so I don't come back. What do you do about that? You need a plan. Everybody needs a plan. A vision has to have a plan. Certainly a vision for bringing, or a plan for bringing the vision into reality. I'm going to talk also about failure in a man of God to offer a plan, turning away potential followers. You have this in your handout that you're seeing. A man of God with no vision and no plans is considered an impotent or a poor leader. It causes people who would like to follow to get discouraged and think, he can't take us anywhere. I like the guy, but he's not doing his job. He's not inspiring me. I don't see where he's going. He doesn't seem to know where he's going. So most followers that turn away in a case like that, They don't want to cause trouble. They don't want to cause a fight. They just go join another church. Or they just get to where they don't come. They just come and sit and watch it done and don't want to be involved. Another thing that does it is that a man of God with lots of vision and no plans is considered a blowhard. And most people are turned away by a blowhard, just all steam. He's just all noise, all bark and no bite. People see through that. That's another thing that turns away followers. Let me tell you about an experience that I had at one time in my life, some years back. I happened to be involved with a pulpit committee, was interviewing pastors, and I was in a church that needed some turnaround. So as we talked to pastors, we asked the question, if you came here to this church as our pastor, what kind of plans do you have that could help turn us around from the somewhat decaying or demising direction that we've been in? What would you do to turn us around, to help us rebuild, to see a revival, to see a renewal, to see this church get healthy again? What ideas do you have for turning us around? So that's the nature of the question we ask all the people on the pulpit committee. One of those who was a candidate said, well, if you have some ideas here, I'm certainly willing to support you. You know what the members of the pulpit committee thought? We're not looking for somebody to follow us. We're looking for somebody to follow. We don't want you to just say, I'll come and support you. We want somebody that come in with some fresh thinking, some vision, direction that we can follow. I'm talking about good men who talk like that, who think like that. Leadership is out front. Leadership is seeing. Leadership is a plan to get some good ideas into place. For a man to do well in the work of the ministry, he desperately needs to develop a mentality of vision and planning. And I can hardly overstress that. So I want to say, for a man of God to do well in the ministry, he must develop a mentality of vision and planning. They go together. It's not an occasional thing, but it becomes his way of life. He's thinking ahead. He's seeing ahead. He's seeing the problems. He's seeing the solutions. He's living in such a way that people can believe in him. He's an example, and they want to get on his bandwagon and follow. A routine excellence, a routine practice, not just an occasional goal line stand, but routinely seeing, routinely planning, routinely out there moving God's people forward. He should see the way, and a way or a plan for getting there. He should be the person with initiative, not waiting on someone else to step up and come up with the ideas and the plan, but the one who is out front, working to see the vision and the plans he has implemented, to see it gets done, not just talking about it. It's a grave, let me tell you, a grave mistake, big mistake for a pastor to wait for someone else to come up with the plan to get a job done. If you practice that, you'll be upstaged. Somebody will step up with not maybe your plan, but their own. Even if it's your plan and they have to take it and run with it, they're going to be seen as the leader, and you're going to lose your position of leadership, and they're going to begin ultimately to follow that Absalom or that person who came in. For a man of God to have this mentality of vision and planning is just vital to his success in ministry. I'm going to take now, in our time left, a little bit of our session to talk about the personal implementation of vision and planning in some specific church pictures. I want to talk about here a committee or a meeting, some sort of a meeting maybe of a pulpit committee or a nominating committee, or maybe it's a routine monthly meeting of a missions committee or a finance committee or a building committee, a men's meeting, a church business meeting. I'm talking about meetings. And in churches you have them all the time. You have a men's meeting, church business meetings, too many probably, but church business meetings, part of it. Okay, two approaches. And as you will see in your notes, and I hope you will really look at this, follow this, look at it later, I want to give you the approach that illustrates pastoral leadership, where the pastor has vision and a plan and initiative. He's out front. He goes into the meeting. He goes into the meeting with an agenda, a prepared an agenda. It's like I have a set of notes here. Come in here to talk to you. These notes are in my heart. These are reminders to keep. This pastor, he thinks ahead. He has ideas, so he establishes an agenda. We're going to open this meeting with a prayer. If it's an ongoing meeting, we're going to read the minutes, and then we're going to talk about our abilities. If we have funds that fund us in the budget, or however, here's how much we were budgeted, here's how much we've spent, here's how much we have left, and so on. And it's where we are in the year. We're 6 months, we're 9 months into the year. So he's in here. He's thought this thing through. He's prepared. So he takes his agenda and he goes into this meeting. They get to the old business, deal with things perhaps that have happened and need attention, and they come to the new business. Okay? Brothers, here's a need we have. We need a new place to store our church bus, or we need to take on a new missionary, or we have a problem here with kids running up and down the auditorium here and just trashing it out. We have people coming in with Cokes and hamburgers and they're spilling their coffee, and we have a problem. We have a need. He sees it. This guy has a dinner. He's out front. This pastor's out front. He's seen a need or a problem. Here, deacons, is what I propose. This is how we can solve this. I've looked at it. It's going to involve some money. It's going to involve some actions on all of our parts to do it. We're going to have to incorporate some other people. But here is what I see our problem to be and our need to be, and here is the plan. I recommend and think we should approach it this way. And so he spells out his plan. He then, after he spelled it out, says, I would like to hear your thinking. Brother James, what do you say? How do you feel about this? And Brother Jim, how do you feel? And Brother Zach, he goes around here and he gets the input. Here's the guy who's come in with vision and direction, how to get something done, how to rejuvenate the church, how to do something physical. He offers the plan. He lets others have input into the plan, takes those suggestions, they work together, come to agreement on any amendments. If it's something many times going to take some research, somebody is assigned the responsibility of getting 3 bids or of doing other research work on this, and we're going to talk about it again next meeting. 1 month from now, we'll be meeting, and this will be on the agenda. We're going to go forward here. So we've had a man with a plan out front, offer it to people. He's not a dictator, going to just do it against what everybody. No, he goes in with leadership. He offers a legitimate problem or a need with a legitimate, well thought out plan. He lets other people have opportunity to input, and he comes out of here with a good plan to go forward. Leadership out front, getting people on your team. Let me tell you how it's normally done. This is the opposite way from that. Normally, a pastor says, well, we need to have a men's meeting, or it's our time to have a men's meeting. It's a deacon's meeting. So, here he is going into the meeting. Gets in there and something like this occurs. Well, brothers, we've come together and we visited a little while here. Is there anything on anybody's heart? Do we have anything to say? You know, I have something here I want to talk about in a minute, but I mean, so he just sort of throws the floor open. Somebody over here brings up something. Somebody maybe brings up, and many times it's trivial. It's totally insignificant. Most of the time it's a gripe. Well, I don't like so-and-so doing this, and this is what's going on. So all of a sudden the floor's opened up, and if there's a need, somebody says, well, here's what I think we ought to do about it. And boy, they bring up some really bad idea. And people are sitting around, and sometimes tempers flare because people get hostile in situations like this. And you know, the preacher's sitting over here hearing this and thinking, I know that wouldn't work. Boy, that would run off somebody, and just chaos. He knows it won't work, but he doesn't have enough courage or spine to stand up and say, that won't work. See, before, he offered the leadership, and Mr. So-and-so or so-and-so had to tackle the preacher. Now they've offered the leadership, and he's got to tackle them publicly. He says, I'm not going to do that. That'd make them, they give too much money. They might leave the church. Besides, there's enough of them. He had got a cousin and brother in here, and they might run me off. I might have to go find another church. So what does he do? He sits there and thinks, oh, me, and his heart's heavy. And then this happens again. Guess what? Whoever came up with the idea, or maybe shot the preacher down, everybody around knows here's the real leader. Here's the loudmouth. Here's the strong man. He's really running the show here. I'm a figurehead as the pastor here. So the pastor begins to feel worse and worse and begins to say, well, I just believe God's through with me here. Nobody wants to follow. Nobody's willing to do it. You know where the real problem is? It's in leadership. I'm not talking about dictatorial, going in and just taking over and ruling like an iron-fisted man. I'm talking about leadership where there's character shown. Guy goes into a new church and he exemplifies his heart, his humble, but it's zealous, and he's a man of vision. And he goes into meetings with a plan, with vision, seeing needs, real needs that everybody can see are real needs, and he's there offering direction, offering a plan to get it done. He's asking people to get on board. It's altogether different from this, well, let's just throw the door open and somebody else leads. So many times he washes out. Preachers go down the road every 2 or 3 or 4 years to another church, always defeated. I will tell you that in this church, about 2 weeks before the taping of this particular session, I asked our deacons, we have 3 in this church. We have about 100, 120 people here on a normal Sunday. We have 3 deacons. Each one has oversight of certain aspects of the work, building, nursery, youth, so on. And each of our deacons has assigned to him 1/3 of our membership for member care. Under that deacon, he watches for them, looks out carefully. These 3 deacons, along with myself and my associate here, came together on Monday morning, and we started our meeting at 9 o'clock in one of the rooms in this church. We stopped for a brief lunch, and we ended the meeting a little past 6. Yeah, in the morning to 6 in the evening. One of the guys just yesterday said, I got home at 7:30. Why do you suppose 5 men, myself, an associate, and 3 deacons, would spend a whole Monday up here in a deacon's meeting, pastor meeting. We were talking about the church. We had an agenda of needs, issues, where we're going. We were looking into the coming year. We were looking at evaluating what we've been doing here. We didn't come here and just sit around and say, well, anybody got to talk? What are y'all doing last week? What do you think about the nursery? I mean, no. We didn't come here and waste everybody's time. We came here to do the work of God. Somebody's got to lead. Somebody's got to step up. Somebody's got to say, this is the work of God. It's worth doing. We need to look at it. And it's going to take us some time. If people see there's value to what they're doing, they see they have a leader that knows where he's going and has a plan, and it's godly. And here's a man of integrity doing. They'll get on board, and they'll stay all day without complaining. I want to pursue this discussion. In fact, we'll be doing another session here. And in this next session, as I said, I want to look at more specifically vision and planning. And I want to talk about what it means to be proactive instead of being reactive. I think this next session that I'm prepared to do, will be a good follow-up to where I'm talking here. And then beyond that, I'm going to look a little far to say, I want to talk to you about some specific application of these ideas to the days when you can no longer preach. I'm not talking because you died. I'm talking about because you're old and gray. How are you going to pay your bills? What's your wife going to do when you die? Thank you for being here today, and I hope this is a blessing. We'll have another session shortly.